Welcome to the Intrinsically Ordered Podcast, where we yap about various things in the church and the gays. I'm getting back from COVID, so I sound absolutely atrocious. I subject these people every time I write a script. They got to listen to like 8 versions of the script, which start with rambling about things in my car, completely unorganized, and they give me feedback so it's not as terrible as it would have been by myself. So, Infallible is watching. This is before I've actually filmed the final video. So we're just going to have a free-form discussion on the fact that you as a queer person in the church are kind of a danger to the Magisterium, because you prove that perhaps following the church's laws don't lead to perfect and overwhelming peace. And yeah, any of y'all got hot takes on the script that I will eventually film in the next few months?
I do love that line, you're a danger to the Magisterium. Do you want to talk about why are you a danger to the Magisterium, Cade?
So if you think about the church sells itself. If you think about sales, the pain is the pitch. And the whole idea of the church is you're broken, you feel all alone, the vibes of life are not there. You need the church. Inside of the church, you find community, you find a social structure, you learn how to behave, you have this shared sense of meaning. You're building all of this up, and that's what a lot of, especially crazy, zealous converts these days talk about in the church. But the thing being queer in the church is that all of those things get weaponized against you because you can't have a family, you can't be fully part of the community structure. You never fit into the structure. So the very thing that makes it great for all these zealous male converts is against you as a queer person. So when you join the church and you find it unfulfilling, you're a danger because you prove that maybe this model isn't the way, that it's the ultimate truth, that it's the fullness of the truth. And so you kind of go against the grain that, this peace that surpasses all understanding.
Mm-hmm. That was the line I was wondering if you'd say, because it's really, it goes back to that for me. That's the promise, right? Because like you said, the shared idea is that we're all struggling, we're all imperfect, and that, hey, Catholicism doesn't ask you to be perfect. We have confession, only Christ was perfect and Mary, but through Christ. And so, if we do our best and we submit ourselves to the sacraments and the authority of the church and, try to walk with God, then, he'll reach out to you with grace, and all you have to do is say yes. And then he'll pull you up from where you are and bring you into a better way of life. And I think that just gay people proves that wrong. It isn't what happens, because you're still the same, and you still have all the same intrinsically disordered feelings, thoughts, and experiences of the world. And there's nothing that praying or following the sacraments or, talking to priests, going to spiritual direction, none of that is going to actually result in a peace that surpasses all understanding. Mm-hmm. And that's the sales pitch for them. So yeah, I agree.
Well, it's really good. I mean, I think in a lot of ways the system, and I call it the system, it's this religion, it wants to be necessary for everybody, right? That's how it works. And so it once it's attracted certain people to it, unfortunately, again, right now, this is a place where it tells you at the same, that you need me. But again, we don't fit within the parameters that it's giving. So it works for straight people. It really works for straight men. That's who it works best for, unfortunately. But, but it doesn't know what to do with us. And so, at the same time, it's saying you need me. And by the way, you're not good enough and you're broken, and we have the fix for you. And so it keeps you in this stuck position, where you believe it. And so you're believing it. You're believing it to say, I need you, but I'm broken and I can't make it work. And you have the solution. So it keeps you in this hamster wheel, because it's saying the solution is to pray. It's conversion. It's mortification. It's whatever. It's fixable, but it's not fixable. One, because the premise that we're broken is not true. So anyway, that's just my thoughts on it as we kind of have this conversation. This is a broken system designed to bring all people into itself, and unfortunately, again, it hasn't accounted itself very well for the gay man or the gay woman.
I think it puts the lie to the name, right? Like Catholicism, Catholic is supposed to mean universal for everyone. It's supposed to be the truth, the best way. I mean, ever since, Vatican II, they've been sort of pushing a more cautious line on the, outside the church, there's no salvation, right?
Mm-hmm.
They'll say, oh, people are part of the truth and you can access, good things through other religions and other philosophies, but that in Catholicism, we have the fullness of it and we have all of it. And so that you're not missing out on anything. And yet gay people end up worse. You can just measure things like happiness, self-acceptance, mental health rates,
family support,
literally, yeah, exactly, everything. Like you can measure it. It's not beneficial for them. And I think that maybe it'd be good if we talked about substantiating what you said earlier, the whole like, oh, you can't have a family, you can't be a priest and all these different things. Like I feel like some Catholics who might listen to this are going to try to push back on those things, and it might be good to flesh that out.
Yeah, I think there's I think a big failure of apologetics is that it's a lot of word games versus the practical side of what is it in reality, which is to say that like the church or what the church teaches or the idea of Catholicism is always this ethereal, undefined utopia that's never found in reality. And so a lot of the church doing apologies for the past bad things that it's done. Well, that's not the real church. Or anytime somebody says anything or has a complaint against the church, you kind of just do this bait and switch where you're like, well, that wasn't really the church, or the church didn't tell you that. And so I think especially when naive young Catholic apologists talk to queer people about their experience in the church, it's like, I'm so sorry the church did that to you. Like, it'll be so much better. And the answer is like, no. Like if you tell somebody to go to their local Catholic church, we have to talk about lived experience, what's common, what is it like in reality versus this non-existent church that's infinitely perfect. And so in people's lived experience, I think to your point earlier, when we look at the stats, and I think it's a more popular thing online these days among kind of like the podcast bro crowd to talk about how religion's beneficial and kind of do this secular justification for just staying in the church. Like even if you don't believe like you're going to have this community, and there's some stats out there like, yeah, being part of a religious community might help in certain ways. And there's studies that people love to bring up. But we look at the queer person's experience and look at the stats, and they're the complete opposite. Like for straight people, like you could kind of do this secular justification, especially being kind of a loosey-goosey Protestant church. It's like, well, you don't like show up for the community. There's not a lot of hard rules. You can kind of just do it. Or most Catholic churches like the one I grew up in. But if you actually follow the church's rules, the stats are completely flipped. And so the best you can do is kind of like sit there and wait and treat life as this waiting room for eternity is really the only solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'd be curious to hear about y'all's own personal experiences in ways that like you feel like it's harmed you, like maybe as an adult. Again, just as I'm getting older and having my own life experiences, looking back and realizing on like all the things I missed out on account of the fact that when I joined the church as a young adult, I really believed it. And yeah. But again, here I am believing this message hook, line, and sinker, but finding myself in a place where I really didn't belong at all. And yeah, so that's some good thoughts there for sure, Cade.
Yeah, I do want to your point, I don't know if this is going to go far afield of where we want to head, but thinking about how it's affected my life, and I literally everyone that I've ever met, like I think it shapes the way it shapes your relationship with yourself in really unhealthy ways, I think. So you learn how to dismiss yourself, second guess every thought you have, just absolutely distrust your own intuitions about morality, about your own strength, your own worth, your own sense that you deserve anything, because the church is the only solution. God is the only solution. And if you try to find any sense of self-reliance or self-worth, that's just hubris talking. And that pattern of thinking, especially if it's something you really believe and you really internalize, is really, really hard to shake. And even after you sort of, like, I've been out of the church for almost a decade at this point, I want to say, and I've long since sort of stopped thinking about things logically that way. But in terms of your emotional processing, it doesn't really go away. It's always going to be a layer there. And I think that's something worth acknowledging.
I think a straight apologist could watch through, let's say, my entire final video and go, well, but if it's true, like, none of this matters. And I think that's by far the tool that apologists are going to use the most is, like, well, just because there's no solutions and just because the what a reasonable person would expect to have happen in the situation is mental health to go downhill, like, there could be nothing in this side of the veil that has any amount of weight on if the church's teaching is true. And so I think as a young queer person, you learn that it doesn't matter what you're feeling. It doesn't matter how bad things are. It doesn't matter if you're being hurt. Nothing that you think matters apart from what this particular book says. And so I think in many ways, queer people can be the most brilliant people within the church, because once you think about like when plate tectonics collide, one gets subducted underneath the other. And if you've bowed down to the church, like, there's nothing more to give besides the entirety of your being to the church as a queer person. And so that's why I think you see so many queer people so high up in the church hierarchy, because they've given everything. Like, what is it like to pray an extra rosary day is nothing compared to, like, I'm never going to get married.
Yeah.
And so you become this brilliant saint in a certain sense. But you learn that by being completely alien to your own body, to living in your own experience, and your body feels the toll. I think it's something that a lot of queer people talk about, is like, you can feel this dishonesty. You can feel this, everybody would think differently of me if they were to know my real secret. And you always worry about, like, well, if I get too close to this person, will then they guess? Or if people make an offhanded joke, and then you start thinking about, does everybody know? Like, your body counts the cost of that, but yet you can't listen to it because it doesn't matter if God's truth is correct.
You create such a, like, are we allowed to swear on this podcast too? Like, cause like, it creates such a mind fuck, because again, here on the one level, like, the church is teaching you to be honest, and we're trying to grow in virtue, and I'm trying to do faith and reason. And so I'm trying to use things like tools, which, like, this is one of the things that attracted me to Catholicism too, is like, on the face of it, like, it's embrace of science. It's embrace of reason. It's embrace of reality. But in fact, for the queer person, then, because of this necessary denial that you must make to deny your own experience, you then it almost becomes a fideistic experience of the faith, where I'm denying my lived experience. The church again is saying you're not actually gay, right? Again, like. And we can't speak for all Catholics, right? Like, the Catholic Church is so wide. In my experience which I had a high demand experience of Catholicism. I don't like to call Catholicism high demand experience religion. A lot of people don't have a high demand experience of it. Maybe you do, whatever. I had a high demand experience of Catholicism. And again, my experience of it, again, like, it really was a fundamentalist experience, an evangelical, charismatic / traditional experience. And it really asked me to do things which, again, Catholicism on paper was not asking me to do. Catholicism on paper wanted me, again, to use my reason, to use my intellect. My reason, my intellect was saying, like, I don't belong here. I want to be honest and truthful, as, like, the saints are trying to tell us to be, and Scripture is trying to tell me to be, and I'm trying to confess in confession, trying to be an honest human being, but it's not safe to be an honest human being in that kind of world. And so what am I? I'm just a person. I'm just a person who's evolved like everyone else and wants to fit in a community and to belong to this system. And everyone that I know belongs in this world. So what am I, it made me, ironically, like my experience of Catholicism made me more of a liar than anything. It made me manipulative. It made me a liar. It made me dangerous on some levels. It made me have questionable behavior out of desperation. Like when I look back now, my questionable behavior was more of a plea for help than anything. And that's all because of my experience of Catholicism, and that's so sad because again, in the mindfuck part, like the cognitive dissonance was again, the church, the same people, the same institution, the same doctrine was at the same time like telling me to be more honest, and yet it was making me more of a dishonest person, hands down.
Absolutely. And for me, that just fed into sort of the self-hatred aspect of it even more, right? Because you're able to recognize that dissonance, and all it does is make you it confirms for you the existential truth of the whole meta-narrative of our own fallen nature and the need for salvation and the grace of God being the only solution, as you're actively getting worse, becoming in some ways like not a worse person, because I think we were all traumatized and we had to do what we had to do to manage, but bringing out things that are negatively affecting us and people around us, all the while trying to desperately be a better person.
Mm-hmm.
It really is a mindfuck.
Well, I think one of the things that I learned, especially going through my teenage years, and now in a relationship, is that, like in Catholicism, especially grappling with your sexuality and your faith, and you don't openly talk to that about everybody, you learn that even the deepest struggles you can keep just inside of yourself. And so one thing that I've even now still have to deal with is like my first idea when something gets really hard or I'm dealing with something really deep is not talk to somebody, it's not text somebody, it's not reach out for help or to talk through it, because you spend years on dealing with the biggest thing that you can grapple with in complete silence, and you just learn to keep it that way, which makes it very hard to be emotionally vulnerable or even to just recognize like, hey, something's really wrong in my brain right now, I should reach out to somebody. Well, that's something that you can't do when you're grappling with your sexuality and your faith.
Absolutely. Did anyone else find that like your experience was that you were hiding from like the system or the church, but God was your way out in a sense? And what I mean by this is I never, so in my way out of Catholicism, bumping into Protestants who tried to show me that like my problem was with the church and not with God, right? And and that's a very complicated thing for a Catholic, because oftentimes the church is just wrapped up with God. However, like I had found, like even though I'm like no longer in a place where I would say I believe in the same God that I did before, it's like my contention, my not fitting in was never with God. It was always with the church, and in the institution. And so like, and it was kind of funny because like I would break the church's rules, right? Or I often didn't feel like I belonged within the system of the church, and my run to for solace and help and love and compassion was God. And I just found like God to be like the one who still accepted me and loved me, even though his church did not. And it's like, it was just very like kind of this weird, I was just wondering if anyone out that had that same experience. Again, like even though as I exited Catholicism, I so also exited the relationship with like the God of Catholicism. Just wondering if that was anyone else's experience when in their time in.
I'm wondering if that was. Did you say you were?
I grew up a Protestant.
A convert? You grew up Protestant. Okay, yeah. I think for me, I didn't choose the church. So
Right.
For me, God was only ever what the church said he was to me. And so for that, he was just essentially the guy who was tallying up all the mistakes you made and who had omnivision,
Okay.
you know? So yeah, basically, I don't know. I thought of God as like the guy who was there every single time I messed up. And if I messed up really bad, I would ask him to help me not do it again.
Okay.
Desperation, because for me, it was just sort of hell on one side and then the guy tisking and checking off his list on the other.
It sounds like for you versus me, like you're even more so than me. You're the relationship between God and the church was almost like
The same.
the exact same.
Oh yeah.
How about for you, King?
So 100%.
My experience, so coming from kind of a liberal upbringing and then going to becoming a Novus Ordo Catholic and then going all the way trad and then kind of going all the way back out, I found that in the mainstream Catholic Church, talking to people who would self-describe as Catholics, that God for me was significantly more judgmental than they were. That like God was this force and this fire behind the church teaching that they weren't even aware to hold me to a higher standard. But then also when I was deep into trad land, I always kept up hope that like God would turn out a lot more like the Catholic Answers Jesus than the Dante Jesus. And so it's always like this, like, well, the church could be like this, but and so in certain ways, God was less strict than in traditional Catholicism or the quite overt homophobia. And then on the way back out, then God started crumpling at that point and ended up in kind of liberal mainstream church land. At that point, I was like, I don't even know what God is, and pulled the Jordan Peterson, what do we mean by God type of discussion. But yeah, I just remember as I was getting into Catholicism, especially with parents who were quite liberally Catholic and were fine with queer issues, I'd be like, no, what God really thinks is something way worse than what you think he thinks.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I think a lot of it was, for some reason, I keep like having certain gospel passages specifically that echo in my head a lot.
Holy Spirit.
And the one that, yeah, I guess the Holy Spirit really loves stoking my anxiety then.
Rule number, it's like Ignatius. Anyway, continue, I'm sorry.
And the Holy Spirit doesn't work as well when you're taking your anxiety meds.
There you go. No, I believe it's Matthew. It might be in other gospels too, but he the idea of thought crime, right? Like the idea that you aren't safe in your head, that it doesn't matter if you do bad things, if you even think bad things, it's the same as if you did them. And God knows every thought that you have. So like there's no way to hide. So I don't know if this was something you guys experienced. Maybe it was, but for me,
I willfully entertain doubt. Not can you have a doubt, but can you willfully entertain ideas of doubt?
Yeah, what does that mean, Kate? Where's that line?
I guess it depends on how much anxiety you have. Legal standards and anxiety in Catholicism turn out they're exactly the same.
Yep. For me, I don't know. I found myself doing these weird, desperate rationalizations, and then like I would have a thought and then I would immediately have thought processes trying to explain why the thought that I just had wasn't as bad as I thought it was.
Wow.
And it would just lead to this like sort of spiral of panicked incoherence. Yeah, and all through all of that, I'm like, well, God sees every step of this, and he knows that really I'm worse than any other people around me know that I am, So whatever people around me tell me, oh, it's not that bad, or I'm sure you're a good person, or whatever, or any reassurance someone in the church might try to give me, it didn't matter, because I knew that God knew every thought that I had, and that I had bad thoughts, and that was enough,
At the same time, a very like Novus Ordo phrase is like 1,000 problems don't equal one doubt. So you can have problems, you just can't have doubts. Like the
I didn't have doubts. I believed it was all absolutely true.
Yeah.
And that's why I was so scared of it.
Well, there's the Catechism says, I just pull up 2088, voluntary doubt about the faith disregards or refuses to hold as true what God has revealed and the church proposes for belief. Involuntary doubt refers to hesitation in believing, difficulty in overcoming objections connected to the faith, or also anxiety aroused by its obscurity. It's like, how do you teach your kids that? It's ridiculous.
That all came later for me when I started questioning it, because like for me a lot of the formative stuff around my sexuality was way before I even questioned any aspect of the truth claims of it all. It was just I assumed it was all true, and what stemmed from that was all of the sort of mindfuck of it all, and that was where I was spiraling for a long time. And it wasn't making me doubt the church at all. It was just sort of like what you said earlier, Kate. It doesn't matter how fucked up it is. If it's true, it's true, and that's the way it is. And so I just kind of assumed that God was just that's the way it was, and it was almost like the problem of evil didn't matter because God had a really big hammer. And if you ask too many questions about it, like, well, there's the hammer,
Wow.
I'm sure it's a good hammer, that's God's good.
I was never afraid of God. And I think that's like, maybe I brought that into from my Protestant upbringing.
Beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord.
And it's not being afraid of them. It was not the same. But like,
see, I'm convinced it is. I think that they just tell you that it's not because they don't want you to be late.
that's where Novus
No, it is. You're supposed to be afraid of this guy.
Novus Ordos are not afraid of God.
No, I know. Yeah, I thought they were all going to hell for that.
Oh yeah, souls are falling to hell like snowflakes.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, we don't deflect too much from the Kate. Was there something else to this that we wanted to cover?
Well, I was thinking we should try to talk about substantiating the claims, right? Like, people think that gay people can be priests. It's not commonly known that like you can't be a priest or a religious person if you have same-sex attraction, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
Because like even my trad parents, when I told them that, they were like, "What? That's
well." Can we clarify the word "can't"? I think that's where like that's an important phrase because it would seem that like when you say the word "can't," are you saying it's technically on paper prohibited versus like invalid experience of the sacrament? Because it's not the case that a gay man can't be ordained. In fact, many have done validly. Even in the church would say, like, even if a man gets through, right? And some of the documents even address that. Particularly one of these documents we'll probably talk about is the 2005 document by Pope Benedict. I think if my memory serves me right, it does even address men who have found themselves to be gay on the other side of ordination. So at least it is possible that they can be. True. But whether it's permitted technically is a whole nother ball.
I mean, that's very true. The dangerous thing is that it's always up to your superior. Where like the official Vatican guidelines could not be more clear. Like, I'm just scrolling the page here. It's just paragraphs on paragraphs. Like, I don't think you can read that. And if you read that and agree that that's authoritative, like, I don't see how you get around that other than by saying, well, it's up to the bishop's interpretation. But then it's this Wild West underground type of culture that depends on the diocese, that depends on the superior. And there's no care, there's no regulations, there's no safety. It's just whatever your bishop says goes. But then you're still, if you appeal your way out, you're still stuck because officially your bishop's breaking the rules for you.
Yeah, it's on paper. If you ask a Catholic, like, what's supposed to happen, you're not supposed to be able to become a priest if you're a gay person. You can, like, technically, with the spirit science of it all, but in terms of the like letter of the law, you're not supposed to be becoming a priest. And so what that does is, if you're a gay person and you think, well, I'm going to be good enough at following church teaching that it won't be an issue for me, I'm going to become a priest. If you think that you can make a valid, gift of yourself to God in this way, you're going to be forever. Yeah. It's like Kate said, that it's sort of a roulette wheel, whether or not you'll get through. And if you do, because your bishop was willing to sort of either look the other way or not pry too much, or, turn a little bit of a blind eye towards that paragraph of that document of church teaching, you're stuck in a really rough place. Because if you're ever honest with people about this part of yourself, you could risk your entire life collapsing around you. And not just your life at this point, it's it's your vocation. And I know you're planning to talk about that in your video, Kate, but I think might be worth mentioning vocations for any non-Catholics.
And to that point, there's priests that talk about their conversion stories. They talk about bad things that they've done. Like for a straight priest to say, I was in a relationship, or I was about to get married, or insert these debaucherous things. Like a priest can openly talk about his mistakes in the past. But if for a priest were to say, and I was in a relationship with a man, like that's going right to bishop. If you were to say you were part of the party scene, like there's this double standard where straight priests can say the most absurd things that they've done in the past, and it's behind them. It's not them. They're beyond that, and so they can share those stories. But no priest that I know of, apart from a few stories here and there, are open that they struggle with same-sex attraction, unlike these straight influencers out there. So clearly there's this culture of silence. Otherwise, half of the priests that are gay would be talking about it, but there's no priest influencers who openly admit to experiencing same-sex attraction.
Because they can't, because their entire career would be in jeopardy, because the church doesn't want them to be able to be openly gay and priests, because it's prohibited officially.
In case anyone's wondering, there's a document that we referenced a few minutes ago, and it's was published, I think it was by Pope Benedict, correct? Yes, Pope Benedict XVI in 2005. It's called The Instruction Concerning the Criteria for the Discernment of Vocations with Regard to Persons with Homosexual Tendencies in View of Their Admission to the Seminary and to Holy Orders. That is longer than saying I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Yes, that is the name of a document. It's fine reading, kept me up for several nights in the seminary at some point. And so.
Maybe the next topic that I won't touch on in my video is kind of be an extra discussion, is that Catholics know that they are very weak on this point when it comes to debating it, especially when it comes to converting people. Like they know they can talk about 7 sacraments, they can talk about arguments for the existence of God, they can talk about, heck, even birth control for ages on end. Like there's things that apologists love to fight about, that they have these well pre-planned arguments for. But every Catholic knows that this is the soft white underbelly. Because, I mean, if you're talking to somebody who's Christian or religious, like the church can talk about scripture, the church can do a lot of things. But if you're not fighting the church on their own grounds, you're fighting them on your ground. The church knows that this isn't convincing, that this is largely word games. And I've noticed since I came out, there's been very few people that have reached out. I've tried reaching out to people and nobody wants to talk about it. And even when I was Catholic and came out to a few people, it's this like, there's a certain like reverence that all of a sudden gets owed to you, because they know that like they're not going to be able to say anything. And so there's this like, you have a little bit more leeway in this like mysterious way, because they know that like you're making a huge sacrifice, more than them. They don't know what to say. If you do anything out of line, they don't know how to handle it. And so it's kind of this like awe in a certain sense, because they know that for you to do this is like even kind of crazy for a faithful Catholic. Like that's how bad that they know that this is the weak point.
I think it goes back, I forget which letter of Paul it is, but it's the one where he talks about getting married so you don't burn with lust. I don't remember which one that is. The entire reason that he lays out is that for those people who are not able to control, their sex drive and be celibate like he is, they should get married as a licit outlet for those feelings. So St. Paul is recognizing, celibacy is not something that can be imposed without choosing it actively for yourself. You can't impose celibacy on people as a rule, because they will not live up to that. And yet, the church turns around and says, well, that's exactly what we're going to do for gay people. And then, as is, the topic of the whole discussion, there's no model for that beyond the fact, just don't have sex. Which, okay, then what? Where do I go from here? And that's, I think, what you're saying, Kate, is people have this sort of awe about it, because I think they know that it's this weird, under-fleshed out part of church teaching where they've sort of been forced to acknowledge that gay people exist and that it's not something that, they can just, ignore. And that it's something that well, in like the more Novus Ordo spaces, it's not something you can change. If you go deeper, they'll start to talk about changing. But if it's something intrinsic, okay, well then you have to be celibate because that's the logical conclusion of the church's sexual teaching. But there's no bigger role or plan or vocation for your life that the church can offer you. And they all it's like this thing that no one talks about. It's just, oh wow, they're so brave for choosing to be this celibate thing. It's like, well, are they really choosing?
No choice.
They have several guns pointed to their head, metaphorically, and there's no actual thing that they can choose. It's just sort of a default, I'm not going to do this one thing.
Here's a story time to prove the point. So when I was in college, nobody knew that I was gay, but people knew me as like the apologist. And Sylvie's like homeschool Catholics. I all know apologetics, but I was like the guy that everybody looked up to in terms of like the new arguments and how to present things well. And I had a friend pull me aside and say, "Hey, I'm talking to this person who says that they are queer." And I have no clue what to say. This is somebody who is deeper into apologetics. And like, he's like, I didn't know what to say. So I wanted to talk to you to see if you could talk to this person because I don't know what to say. Like, even, it's not like normal Catholics, but even Catholics that have started studying this stuff, like they know to not touch this with a 10-foot pole. Like they'll talk about cultural issues. They'll talk about abortion all day long. They'll talk about perhaps even transgender people, but queer people who are especially in happy, healthy relationships, they will not touch that with a 10-foot pole because they know it's like, how do you talk to a married gay couple? And this is perhaps another thing that's wild. Catholic Church teaching would dictate that if you're a married gay couple on your deathbed with your kids surrounding you and you want to go to heaven on your deathbed with the family that you've built and that you've loved and that you've supported, the correct thing for you to do is to look at your spouse and say, I renounce you and all of our sins together, and have your children go get adopted by some other family, even if you survive. Like, it's the most ridiculous things on planet Earth.
Mm-hmm.
This reminds me of my high school religion class. I remember this very clearly. I was asking about this very thing. Like, okay, so what happens if there's a gay family, say two men, they're married and civilly married and they have kids, so they've adopted. What are they supposed to do if one or both of them become convinced of the truth of the Catholic Church, which is something you'd want? And straight up, the only answer you get is they should divorce. And because kids need a mother and a father, all of those kids should go somewhere else, aka back to the foster system or something. Which is just so blatantly like, if there is such a thing as moral intuition, that screams against every single one of them,
The response that I think I used in the past, I heard this from my mentor, and it was convincing. I'd be curious to hear what you say about it. Would be something like this. The culture is so confused, and has twisted up sex and intimacy very much. And for many people, sex, and that's what we're going to talk about, right? I think implicitly is saying like it's the sexual relationship. And how this person laid out this argument. And again, I took the argument. I thought it was good. Was to say, well, sex is in fact not a necessary part of a healthy life. Like it is a part of a healthy life, but it's not a necessary part of a healthy life. But what is intimacy. So without sex, I will not die, but without intimacy, I will. And so, is there a scenario? So what's your response to something like that? Just curious.
Um,
Let me add one more thing. I'm sorry. For many, the argument kind of concluded for many women, and I would probably say men too, married women, sex is anything but intimate.
Right. Yes.
So,
I would say that it's true that according to church teaching, sex is not a necessary part of, a healthy life. And literally, yes, you will not die if you don't have sex in your life. But I would ask how you're supposed to achieve intimacy without an actual relationship. And I know that they might say something like, okay, well, you could have sort of close platonic bonds with people, and that's something that I know a lot of apologists of Catholic and Protestant varieties will say, like, oh, you just need to have really good friends and, really foster those same-sex friendships so you don't have sort of disordered feelings about it. But I mean, I think we're all old enough to stop. Like, you don't feel the same thing for your friends as you do for your partner. Like, it's just different. And I think everyone knows that. Like, that it feels like gaslighting a little bit to not acknowledge, because that really is it's just different. Like, what are we talking about? And obviously people don't necessarily need to have fulfilling sex in their romantic relationships necessarily for them to be fulfilling. Sure. But that it's an important part, certainly. And even if you were to have a sexless, essentially romantic relationship, I don't think that the Catholic Church is at a place where it's prepared to condone even that. Certainly not in trad circles. It's considered a near occasion of sin, and you're supposed to avoid those because, I mean, living with someone that you're attracted to sexually
in a disordered way,
every waking minute, in a disordered way, like it just seems insane. Like, it just seems like a ticking time bomb for you if you believe that sex is really going to send you to hell. And sexual thoughts, remember, are also things that send you to hell. Like, it's not just actions, it's thoughts we're talking about. Like, you have to guard your eyes, your brain patterns. So any sort of relationship where you're in an intimate, live-in situation with someone that you are attracted to is not something that I could see anyone condoning from the point of view of at least traditional Catholic sexual and moral ethics. I know that I've seen some bishops try to say that it's okay, but I feel like that is also underdeveloped. Like, if it is okay, they need to develop a way for it to be okay for people.
We have Josephite gay marriages. Is it true?
And I guess taking a step back even from these relationship ideas, just saying, like, I guess my question really is, like, what's your response to the idea that life without, I don't know, just that first tearing apart sex and intimacy. And for a lot of people, sex is very intimate, right? And that's the conduit by which one experiences the intimacy. Absolutely. But yeah, I guess your response to the idea of, can you live a healthy, happy, fulfillable life as a human being, one, without sex? And then I'm sure there, again, like, I want to hear a response to that case.
So I would say, so another interesting thing, and I'll probably talk about this in future videos, that I credit Jordan Peterson for leading me out of the church. This is like a very interesting thing in of itself. Because a lot of people, he's a figure in which they become radicalized. For me, he was actually my trail out. And one of the things that he talked about is, in his clinical experience, to live a fully actualized life, you need to have an intimate relationship. That you need to have some sort of responsibility when it comes to work. You have to have some sort of activity or hobby that you have, and you have to have some sort of deep, intimate relationship. And a lot of the times, kids or some sort of responsibility, whether that's pets or a really demanding career, something that, like, pulls you out of yourself. Well, me says that in his clinical experience, like, you need some sort of responsibility like that. And I was like, as a single person, you just don't have the type of relationship. Like, no matter how close your friends are, it's not a romantic relationship. It's not, you don't build your life with your friends. You have your life and then your friends get added into it, but you don't consider where you move. I mean, it talks even your parents, like, wherever your parents live, you can still move away from them when you're planning your career. But when you're married, you're not like, well, I'm going to move here, and, like, you can decide if you want to come or not. Like, and so Jordan Peterson talking about, like, that need in a human person, I was like, that'll never happen. And by his definition, this right-wing type of figure, even by his standards, I'm not living a fully actualized life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's true. And I would say that I know they might push back and say that the only type of fulfilling relationship isn't necessarily a romantic one, right? Because they might say, like, okay, your kids are also a fulfilling relationship. You could have a sibling, or you could have a friend that's, like, really close enough for it. But it just is true that for the vast majority of people, relationships are something that we are sort of wired to seek out and obviously people can be asexual, and I'm not trying to invalidate that experience, but that's not necessarily ever the majority.
That's not what we're talking about here. Right. Exactly. You're talking about human beings, that like are sexual, I think, and then asked to figure out, well, we've got all these different scenarios, right? Again, like we have a subset of gay people who are told that their only option really is a sexless life. Okay. And to figure out intimacy outside of sex. And that's it. If you want to be part of the club, that's what your choice is. Right. And then you have a bigger subset of people that's kind of includes that, which are young men and young women who maybe want to pursue a ministry or some sort of vocation to church, but again, are told that their only option for that then would be a celibate life, but they're not asexual. So they're told that there's a spiritual gift that they can either discern that they have or maybe can ask for, neither of which I believe is true anymore. So, like this creates a problem in trying to live this out. To say like, I have a vocation to celibacy. It's like, well, did you discover that, or did God give it to you, and how do you know? And I mean, it creates this vocation of really this massive denial of your own being. And again, I'll just close with this. Like, as I've stepped out of the church and come to see, like, my opinion is, again, unless you are asexual, the sexual experience is, in fact, necessary to be a healthy human being, at least occasionally. A meaningful, healthy sexual relationship of some kind in which it's not denied, is necessary for like healthy development and living a normal experience. Again, I'm not saying that means you have to have sex once a week, once a month, once a year. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is the non-denial of it is important for that.
Yeah. I would agree. I think that so when church says things like that, right, where it's like, oh, this is a spiritual gift that you get. It's one of those times when having been out of the church so long now, I want to ask, like, can you prove that? Can you show me that anywhere? Can you give me any data? Is there anything that suggests that priests or religious are more likely to be able to be celibate than non-religious people? And the truth is, no, there isn't. I don't think they've ever tried to do studies like that. And if they did, I sincerely doubt that they would bear that out.
The gift is a very large eraser that the bishop has.
Exactly. I think you're right. I do hesitate because I don't want to try to like shame people like if they aren't able to like get relationships or sex. I know that can be difficult for a lot of people, and it's something that people struggle with. But I think the reason people struggle with it as a mental thing is because it's something that we need. It really is just a fundamental part of the human experience. And I think as a Catholic, you're so used to like thinking about in this weird flip-flop way that like sex is like beautiful in marriage and everywhere else is this horrible, disgusting thing. It's like, no, the same thing that Catholics see in marriage, like it's just as beautiful and valuable outside of it. Like you still are able to experience another person in a way that is, at least, I don't know, in my experience, it really helps develop your sense of empathy and ability to relate to another person. I don't know. It's just a whole part of relationship building with other people that I think is really fundamental, that a lot of people need, at least a little bit of in their life.
And to throw in, when apologists talk about all these evils that are out there in the world, the God of the Old Testament let slavery go on because people would be too upset if God took their slaves away, if he made it clear that you can't own human beings. And so because too many people would be upset, God decided to do this kind of like progressive revelation. And there's so much mental gymnastics in the apologist repertoire about every conceivable issue about the church up until 8 seconds ago. There is so much leeway, and we're supposed to see things as this progressive revelation. But when it comes to a straight individual in the church who might sleep with a girl from time to time. It's like, yeah, that's bad, but like, that's not groundbreaking in the church for some young man to confess that. But for a man to confess that he held hands and felt aroused for another man, like, you can't even start there. Straight people are afforded this absolute leeway. Even you look at Catholic school teachers, like Catholic school teachers can be on multiple civil marriages. They can have flings outside of marriage. They can deny church use, and they can do anything that they want. But dare your priest spend too much time stalking Facebook and figure out that you've been monogamously married to somebody for 25 years. Now, that's not a reflection of God's love. But being together for 25 years, outlasting many Catholic marriages, we can't even begin to acknowledge that. We can't even go like, well, God would have a progressive revelation. It's like, no, it turns out that homosexuality is worse than slavery. And this is why I think the church is particularly vulnerable on this issue, because it's not that like, hey, going to the club and doing poppers isn't great for you. And you're like, yeah, I think I can get on board with that with the church. It's like, you can't do anything. And even the slightest thing is the worst conceivable thing.
Yeah.
There's no sense of of gradation to this, which makes it even more ridiculous. It's this ultimate claim on this completely vacuous foundation, which is why, like, you talk to a Catholic apologist, and there is almost this certain, like, well, I really only debate that topic if you're Catholic already, or like we only really emphasize it, like a Bishop Arab talking to Dave Rubin type of moment, where it's like, I'm just not going to push it.
Yeah.
Like that's really the only thing you can do if you're talking to a secular person who doesn't play Mad Libs with you in Latin.
Right. And I mean, this is like, to be fair, like, I'll say to be fair, I understand the plight because I was there myself, right? Like, and part of the complication, at least from the Catholic point of view, is as I understand it, is that the whole Catholic apologetic on this is more of a philosophical issue and not a scriptural one. Versus like when you're an evangelical, it's so easy. You can just open up the Bible and say, it says right here, blah, 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 case closed. The Catholic, we don't do that, right? I say we there. Like, it's not done that way. This is a philosophical issue, so that in essence, the church's teaching on sexual behavior, on this, you could in theory, take all the religion away, take the Bible away, and you would still have the same answer, right? It is just a
That's what they say.
This is what they say.
But that's not actually what they do. Right? Okay. Catholics always talk about that we don't need scriptures. If you believe in the church, then you have to believe the philosophy. Like, the theology of the body is only convincing if you're within the church. Right? And that way, as a Catholic, they don't have to point to scripture. They don't have to talk about a synagogue. And so you don't have to point to scripture and have the Protestant debate. You get to just skip right to the end while the church says it's true. And then they say, well, like, this is based on secular standards and we can play these word games. But if you bring theology of the body and bring it to the modern world, it's this fish out of water moment where they say it's about philosophy and we don't need scripture. All of a sudden, when you start talking to Catholics, everything in their argument, if you were to call this a lawsuit, would be they're trying to admit religious arguments into evidence. That's the entire plight. That's, if you talk to any apologist for any length of time, the first thing they have to do is bring in religion, because they know that word games, if instead of ambushing people on the street, if you talk to people who can actually answer your questions, the answer is like, you're playing word games here.
Yeah, I think it's deeper than that. Like, I think and then I'll say, like, I think it's a little bit deeper than theology of the body. I think it's teleology. Like, I think it's Aristotelian teleology. And again, like, to get down there, you basically have to have this philosophy 101 thing. But again, like, but like, you know, again, as someone who did this, like, I tried to explain teleology. I pick up a fork. This is what a fork is for. You know, like, etc. It has forkness. You know, the acorn in the tree, the chair, the bullshit, all this stuff.
Yep.
And I felt justified then as a Catholic. However, until one day someone said, I just don't think teleology is like lines up with science. And I was like, fuck, no, I'm screwed. Right. So, but yeah, I think like, it's like, one, to find a Catholic who is even that schooled to know what teleology is, or even can talk about Aristotle, you know, they're to that extent, their ground is very loose. Okay, I'm sorry, Colin.
No, you're good. I was just going to say that for me, it wasn't that we didn't talk about scripture, because we definitely did. You know, crying out to God for vengeance was
Hey, you sorry for you're coming from a traditional background, right? A trad background. Okay.
I am, yes. That line is a reference to Cain and the blood that his brother spilled. It's from the Old Testament, and this church document is just categorizing a bunch of different kinds of sins as sins that cry out to God for vengeance. And they just threw sodomy in there because, it's really gross.
Murder, usury, and sodomy, or stealing a working man's wages is like such an interesting constellation.
Yeah, they ignore that one now. Anyway, we definitely were very consciously taught about, the Levitical passages and Paul's passages, and even Jude mentioning Sodom and Gomorrah and stuff. Like, it was all very clearly spelled out. And I think a lot of the philosophical framework of teleology and Aristotelian, metaphysics and all that, it's very much, in my experience, sort of a comfortable post hoc system that they can adopt to be like, see, this is why the Bible says this.
Yeah.
Because there's this desire, right? Like, it's weird. They don't like to say they're utilitarian at all in terms of their evaluation of God's moral pronouncements, but they often will evaluate whether or not God did a really good thing or a bad. Yes, exactly. They sell it through utilitarianism. They'll be like, see, God said that you shouldn't eat pork, and it's actually because it's easier to get diseases from eating pork, and it was secretly super smart. And it's just like, oh, see, like, God said you can't have gay sex because actually, if you look at the teleology of blah, 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 it's this framework that they use to allow their religion to appear scientific, but it's like the science they're using is from the 1200s. I'm not even kidding. Like, it's Aquinas literally just copies like a lot of Aristotelian stuff. And in my opinion, weirdly, like, I don't think he does a good job of understanding Aristotle always. But I'm going to get flamed for that. But he,
I won't say it.
I don't know, like the expounding of like teleology, I don't know, like the more Catholicism tries to rest its foundational theological claims on these like philosophic axioms, like, oh, that teleology is real and matters, it really, I think, kind of backfires against things, because it becomes useless when trying to argue with a modern person who doesn't give a flying like crap about teleology, because that's been debunked scientifically since like the Enlightenment.
But it's so helpful in the way I'm talking about of an apologist, because again, the people who have
if you're already
like 95%, I'm like, wow, that sounds really smart.
Because if you're already bought in, you it sounds nice. It's a complicated logical framework that is internally consistent. And there's a certain attractiveness to it as like a model of the universe, but it's not convincing to someone who's not already bought into it, in my opinion and in my experience. And I think even as someone who grew up with it, like I started like in high school without anyone telling me. I was like, wait, this doesn't add up in certain ways. Like, it's not that hard to poke holes in it, I think, just because your lived experience of the modern world goes so against a lot of these core philosophical axioms, like the sort of Platonic idea of substance and form as this like truism that we have to hold for transubstantiation to make any sense is just not as intuitive in the year 2024 as it might have been in the year 1200,
Well, especially for somebody who isn't as fully convinced about the absolutism of heaven and hell, right? Because if you say like, oh, and if you do this, you're going to burn for billions of years, it's like, okay, it's a rational argument. But if you talk to a secular person who's like stuck on this, so what do you do about, right, the church says no, so what do you do?
Right.
Like, you can't answer that. So you got to sell people. This is always the like back of the room type of teaching, like any sales tack. Like, you get them in with the nice happy things, and then like once they're all the way bought in and they purchase, then you like tell them, well, in terms of conditions that you signed, you actually have to do this. Like, this has always got to be a back room type of conversation once you've been sold. And they approach it with emotional delicacy because they know that if you're not brainwashed already, it sounds like jibber jabber to like talk about the forms and then bring up anorexia as like the proof that being gay is wrong. And then you pull out chairs and then you like, what are we talking about here?
Yeah.
Like, and I think Catholics like love this outlook at theology of the body, love this, like, we're loving the whole person and all of these amazing metaphors. And then you realize you're just drunk on symbols. And then to the outside world, you just sound like you're smoking crack.
Yeah. Yeah, man. And it was crazy in my experience, guys. Like, it's just so crazy as we're talking here. I just realized, like, I never once questioned teleology. Like, for me, that was such, it was satisfactory. And like, if I wouldn't say I ever had doubts, but like in my moments of struggle when I was like, I don't know, I'm making this work, I don't understand, like, it all came back to the fact that this was reasonable. Catholicism really was so reasonable. And I never could see outside of the system, right? We say it's internally consistent. I was stuck inside and unaware that I was stuck inside. I was unaware that there was a different way to look at the world other than a teleological outlook. Even though, like, I wouldn't be able to have said that before, but that's precisely what it was. So I kept going to the bottom of the bottom to try to, like, and they would catch me. Teleology would catch me and keep me within the system. It's crazy.
Yep. No, that I had the exact same experience. I used to describe it as feeling like you're trapped in this like logic maze, right? Where you're constantly running around and you're like, this is clearly wrong. There's a way out of here. And you keep getting like looped in circles. And so you can't find a way out. But if you just like looked up, you're like, oh, just jump out of the maze. Like the whole maze is useless. Just leave it. You don't need it.
Well, I mean, that's where a lot of apologetic questions are, these like questions that don't make coherent sense. Like, what is sex for? It's like people get tripped up on that all day long.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's one of those questions like, do you love that cubes have 9 sides? And you're trying to like figure out how to like answer the question. You're like, it's just not a question, right? But it sounds like a real question, right? If you ask them like, what is sex for? And then they'll like say some things. It's this trick questions. The answer is like, let's ask a real question, which is either like, what do people often use sex for? Or what should we permit it to be used for? Or, so it's like you get stuck in these logic mazes because they're asking questions that can't be answered unless you subscribe to their framework.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because like now, like where I am outside of the church and having like dealt in all this stuff, when you hear the mass, it's a very common one. They'll ask that, like, what is sex for? There are so many assumptions smuggled in with that question. And that is such sloppy philosophy. Like from an actual philosophy perspective, that is so sloppy because you haven't established any of the prerequisites to make that question coherent. And so either they don't know or they're just trying to hope you won't notice when they ask these questions, because to the average person who's not thinking like in pure like philosophical logic terms, that seems reasonable, but it's not actually reasonable. It's one of these things that you have to like break out of the paradigm of how they look at the world to actually understand how many assumptions they make.
So if somebody were to ask, like, what is sex for? I would ask them, what do you mean for? And then if you were to say, I would say that people use sex for fun. They use it for intimacy. They use it for creating new life. They use it as a way of getting things. They use it as a form of power. Like, if the question is, what do people use it for? You can answer a lot of things. Or if somebody asks the question, like, what should we permit sex to be used for? And the answer would be like, between consenting adults that have full faculties, the answer is whatever they both consent to. Like, you can answer questions similar to what is sex for, but you can't answer the trick question because it's a trick question.
It's a trick question.
Exactly.
Why are we here? What is the meaning of life? Again, like, some of those that's a trick question, I think.
I agree. No, it's the Baltimore Catechism style. Like, they have these questions and then they give you these answers. And if you don't think too hard about them, they sort of fit neatly together.
Not the Baltimore Catechism.
There's not as much depth to it. Oh yeah. And you also, I grew up on that.
This apologetic drop, which is like the church has answers to these complex questions. And so a lot of debate, a lot of oration is really just this illusion of confidence. And so when you ask somebody like, oh, what is this for? And somebody like, oh, that's an interesting question. You take a second and you start answering, and it's not as convincing as like, boom, 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 right? It doesn't seem as convincing. It's even seen in like, let's say like the what is a woman debate is like, well, first of all, the definition of like an adult human female, like doesn't actually encompass everything. It isn't a diagnostic standard. But like when you have two people and somebody's like, well, I got a definition ready to go. And somebody else is like, hey, like maybe we should think about it. It's like to the audience, it's like, wow. But you're like, no, like, if somebody walks in, if let's say your doctor, and they say, hey, I'm a woman. And then you say, are you adult human female? That's not, right? That's not medical terms. That isn't like a guide to figure out. Like, it's all these things that so much of rhetoric these days is who has the drop on the snappiness of the response.
I think also it's a reliance on the idea of this, like the church as this 2,000-year-old repository of ancient wisdom, right? And I remember distinctly, like growing up, the apologetic line always told to us was like, it's okay not to know the answer when someone asks you things, but you can always tell them, I know the church has an answer. And that's like the selling point, right? That there is an answer for everything. And you know what? That doesn't mean they're good answers.
It might be true. I just remember what was a response, but yeah, it doesn't mean it's a true response. Or
Well, that's where I went even to and he recently converted and it was just saying, was like, I was amazed that the priest I was talking to had an answer to everything that I asked. I was like, absolutely. Like, having an answer isn't the hard part. Having a good answer that makes sense is. And if you're asking all of these big questions for the first time and you're like, what is the meaning of life? And it's like, boom, 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 boom. And then somebody's like, well, like, you got to go on your own journey. It's like, why do the hard work when I could just like grack up for these straws out there? It's like, yeah, having an answer is different than having a good answer. And I think I've said before that, like, in a courtroom, both sides are always going to have replies all the way down. Like, you're never going to get the other side in the courtroom to admit, like, oh, we don't actually have an answer to that. Like, they're going to make some bullshit up.
Mm-hmm.
The question that the jury decides isn't like, can you just keep going back and forth on an interrogatory all day long? It's like, at some point, you got to go, like, what is more reasonable?
Mm-hmm.
And not just who has a fancy answer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%.
So this is kind of like what you're getting back, a little bit circling back to, Kate, was to say something about the apologists having answers to the plight of the gay person who has no place within the church, or seemingly the answers they do have are not satisfactory in a way. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah.
No.
And I think there's going to be a few people in the comment section. And I have a friend who's he's out to his local Catholic community and they're supportive. And so there's probably going to be people that go, my experience of being a gay Catholic is that my particular group supports me. And the answer is like, awesome, man. Like, if you can do that and you have a great community and you want to do that, like, I'm not holding you back. Really, the crux of my argument is if you were to poll a cross-section of 1,000 people in the English-speaking world who would perfectly adhere, or who would give intellectual assent to the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So that's their subsection. People who give intellectual assent to the totality of the Green Catechism. What percent of them would answer, this is virtuous, this is neutral, or this is sinful, to a whole host of questions surrounding what you should do as a queer person? Your graph is going to look like buckshot at the end of the day. From people who adhere to the Green Catechism, people who listen to Catholic answers, people who love the church and follow church teaching, you're going to get a buckshot answer. And maybe if you're in this one particular corner and you have something great going for you, that's awesome. My argument isn't that the data is in one corner. My argument is that the data is all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
You might be in a good corner of it, or your experience might be awesome. The answer is there's a whole lot of other babies that have gone through that target, and they're in some really bad places.
Yep. And that fault is with the church's ambiguity and refusal to clarify or delineate some sort of path for people with same-sex attraction, because they know they can't, is where it comes down to. They've sort of boxed themselves into a corner here, where unless they sort of give in on at least one of their premises,
And they can't do that.
there's nothing they can really do. They can't do, well, the truth is historically they actually can.
They'll just have a deeper insight into all your revealed doctrine.
Exactly. Oh, we always believe this.
Well, because Pope Francis could wake up tomorrow and declare ex cathedra as a dogma that monogamous gay marriage is okay. And that's going to supersede every church document, because there's no dogmatic claim, like the church has never formally and solemnly defined that homosexuality is a sin. It's authoritative, or like we can't question it, or we have to give intellectual assent. But there's nothing stopping Pope Francis from waking up tomorrow and declaring the third thing ever ex cathedra as an undeniable truth of the faith. And then they could say, well, it's not supported in church history. It's like, well, if Thomas Aquinas can be wrong on the Immaculate Conception, certainly grandma at the parish can be wrong about her homophobia. Like, this isn't wrong.
And ex ecclesia nulla salus means you don't even have to be actually baptized to be saved these days. Then marriage between one man and one woman can definitely be deeper and understood.
And if we can redefine that salvation outside of the church, like, we don't have to be baptized. You just have to like work through kind of your understanding of the natural law and the voice that's all in human hearts. Like, if the Aztecs can be saved, I think your local monogamous gay couple that has been together for 30 years and they've fostered the kids that even the straight people won't take. They've given back to their community. They've educated people in the faith, and they've been sponsors, and they've been godparents. Like, I think they're going to get into, folks. Now, do I think heaven exists? No. But I think as a Catholic, and the only answer is to like working out your salvation, fear and trembling. It's like work out your homophobia and fear and trembling. You got to watch the propaganda. You got to like feel a visceral reaction to like the idea of gay people. Is the only way that this makes sense is if you really work on your emotional responses, listen to a little bit more Matt Walsh. Otherwise, if you just meet a gay couple down the street and they have kids, you're going to walk in and somebody's going to be like, hey, you got to tell them to like dump their kids off of the local foster care is so much better than them. And you're like, that's just not my lived experience. So you got to go watch and tell all of your friends to do like a What Is a Woman Watch party and have that be your caricature of the queer experience.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's true. The church fundamentally has a choice in front of it at this point. They can choose to change church teaching and do the right thing, in my opinion.
They can develop church teaching.
Yeah, just drop the... Or they can double down and watch as their numbers shrink and get a more and more radical base of people who assent to all of their homophobia and, watch Matt Walsh and, I mean, hey, that's a choice in front of them. And I don't know which one they'll pick, but I'd like to hope that they would choose the better option. But I don't know. I'm pretty cynical at this point.
Yeah, they're not doing nothing. Because their entire donor base, like, it's all the trads or the people who are really in that are giving the money and supporting the parish. And so, like, of course, those are going to be the only voices that they listen to. They've been bankrupt, I hear, for some very nefarious reasons these days, and they're a little bit hurting for cash. Why?
Oh, you mean the Freemason communist gay infiltration?
Of course, where they had the briefcase full of all of the names that was opened up in a car crash. Yep.
Oh my God.
Classic.
Not all the conspiracy theories. I've heard of it, yes.
Oh, yeah. I just love the idea that they just had a list of 50,000 priests in a briefcase. It was like, how big of a briefcase, first of all, was it to have 50,000 names? And then where the hell do you find 50,000 communists that are willing to become priests? Like, I get you can have like spies, but they gotta have like a fan. Like, what are we talking? 50,000 people. That's a lot of communists. I don't think even McCarthy could have cooked that one up in the back room.
I will say we're getting a little harsh, and I don't want to like make any Catholics, actively practicing Catholics or any active gay Catholics listen to this. Please understand, like, I'm not trying to belittle your faith or your relationship to God or any of that. I really, it's not my beef. My beef is with the structure of the church and the way it's currently and historically used against queer people. And I sincerely would like to see them change their doctrine and be more accepting. And I really do hope that that's something they can do. And in that case, if they do that, then more power to you. And I really hope your relationship with the church gets better and deeper and more beautiful. But I have to call it like I see it now. And the way I see it now is it's causing a lot of pain to a lot
I like that, Colin. I feel like, I miss my experience at the church. I loved it. I really loved it. It from the time I was 19 till 35, which is a majority of my life, and then not only majority of my life, but a majority of my free acting conscious life as an adult, was marked with the faith. And, it just no longer worked for me, and it was kind of shoved in my face that it didn't work for me in a lot of ways, and it's too bad. And I just, if there could be a way that it could work, and if you, dear listener, find a way to make it work, yeah, more power to you. Good for you. But no, this is not an exercise in belittlement. I think it's more of an exercise, probably born of pain than anything.
Oh yeah.
And to say, like, not us having moved on, but have to reminisce and create content around it years later. But still, it comes from pain, and I think the pain comes out of love. A love for what we were born into, for my culture, for my chosen culture, for my chosen family, for the beautiful culture and the music, and even though I've got thoughts about liturgy these days, but still beautiful experiences of liturgy, important moments of my life, all painted with Catholicism, and if I could make it work today, I would, but I don't. It might be ruined for me at this point, but it's just a shame. It's just too bad. And I think my experience as a queer person is that there's no clear, healthy way forward for me in it now. And again, I'm no longer a person of faith, so that's another challenge. So,
well, I think that's if you're a queer Catholic listening, the problem or the reason why we left wasn't that we didn't find magic in waking up early to go to morning mass, to see all of the old grandmas at church that mentor you and love you and provide you gifts. The reason why we left wasn't that you get to go to the adoration chapel and have an hour of silence to reflect on life, to journal. Our problem isn't that when you feel, when you get hurt or somebody in your community is feeling down, that you have a way that you can express support for them. The reason why we left isn't that when somebody's stuck at home, a bunch of people make meals for them and take care of them. The reason why we left isn't that you get to gather community and see new life and see all these wonderful families. The reason why we left isn't that you get to sing with people and that you get to go on awesome church retreats and that you get to experience joy and that you get to share that with your classmates and with your coworkers. Our problem isn't that you found peace in Jesus and you want other people to also be at peace. The problem is that the church says you can only have those things if you fully adhere to every single thing, that you can never fall in love, that you can never hold hands. That we're not saying those things are bad. We're saying those things are good. We're saying it's evil for the church to say you can only have those good things if you listen to the church on every single matter and you can't think for yourself. That's why it's a tragedy. If there's a world in which you can have those things and you can love and that you can be a full participating member of the church with an amazing family, that'd be amazing. The tragedy is that the church says that those are mutually exclusive, and we're just saying that they're not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If there's just a better place for us there, where I can flourish as a man, as a gay man, you can't. There's no place there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that'll bring us to the end.
I was going to say that feels like a good spot.
Yeah, awesome. So this is take one on our podcast. We might have different people on. For future episodes, we'll be listening to people's stories of coming out. We'll be talking about being gay and Catholic, talking church documents. We want this to be a collaborative process, a little more informal than some other content out there. So feel free to leave comments down below if you're watching. Feel free to reach out and email. If you want to be on the show and have something to say, reach out. My contact info is on the actual channel information. You can get that pretty easy. And let us know what you think and what you want from future episodes. Any closing remarks from y'all?
Oh, this is great. I'm looking forward to it. I'm hoping this can be something that can fill this a space that's needed. I think that there just isn't as much as I'd like there to be about being Catholic or ex-Catholic and gay and struggling with these experiences. So happy to be on this journey with you guys.
Me too. I think this is just, I love having, like, these are the conversations that, man, it would have been so nice to hear just even this conversation 3, 4, 5 years ago. And I just hope that, yeah, exactly as Colin said, just fill a space. Right now, there's some other people out there kind of filling a little bit of a space, but this is a unique space. And I'm really, just really proud to be part of it. And so thanks, Kate and Colin, for going on it with us. I think we'll have a good journey here.